Hello, and welcome to another Changing Conversation on SGS Live. I'm PJ Kwong, and today we're going to be talking about building trust and transparency in the hydrogen sector. As hydrogen plays an increasingly central role in the EU's decarbonization plans, trust and transparency in its production and certification are vital. Along with our expert panel, we're going to explore how credible certification schemes, especially CertifHy, but also RSB and ISCC EU, are helping shape the future of green hydrogen in Europe. We're going to provide an overview of how SGS supports stakeholders with certification services across the hydrogen value chain, some key insights into EU hydrogen strategies, and the Renewable Energy Directive, or RED, as well as deepening your understanding of green hydrogen certification and its role in building a more transparent, low-carbon future. We have an excellent panel of experts with us today, starting with the SGS Global Head of Climate Solutions, Francesca Cerchia. Welcome, Francesca.
Thanks a lot, PJ, and I'm really excited to be here. So let's kick off this conversation.
Amazing. I agree. Our next guest is the SGS Global Technical Director, Bhavish Prajapati. Welcome, Bhavish.
Thank you, PJ. Thank you for inviting me. Excited for this conversation.
Me too. And our final guest is David Kenarsari, Global Key Accounts Development Manager, Renewables and Infrastructure. Welcome, David.
Hi, PJ. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So just before we get into our discussion in earnest, Francesca, can you walk us through what Impact Now means for sustainability?
Yes, of course. So Impact Now, it's exactly that. So driving impact across 4 pillars. And this is an initiative we've launched at the end of 2024. And it's to position SGS as a sustainability enabler, because every service we provide really has a positive impact. Impact Now, it's organized around 4 pillars. So we have a climate pillar, we have a nature pillar, we have a circularity pillar, and we have an ESG assurance pillar. And it's a global initiative to position ourselves a leader in sustainability.
You know, there is a lot going on, and usually I have a poll question or something a little bit later on in the broadcast, but we're going to do something a little bit different. And that is, I want my audience to answer the following question. How long do you think it takes to complete a pre-certification process in CertifHy? A, up to 2 months, B, up to 6 months, or C, more than 6 months? Again, the question is, how long do you think it takes to complete a pre-certification process in CertifHy? I'd love you to put your answers in the chat box below, and we're going to come back to those answers a little bit later. But for now, we're going to get into our conversation in earnest, as promised. This is for Bhavish. Can you talk to me about the EU's plan of decarbonization? Key targets in the decarbonization plan, short-term 2030 and long-term 2050, and priority sectors for the decarbonization of the EU.
Yes, Vijay, sure. So, EU has a very ambitious decarbonization plan for its economy, and aligning with Paris Agreement, EU aims to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. That means becoming net zero GHG emissions for entire economy of EU. And the goal is, of course, central to the European Green Deal, which is also legally binding under European climate law, to make sure that they are achieved. And of course, it has got plans to lead this by focusing on investing a lot in green technologies, empowering the citizens, and supporting through industrial policies, finance, and research. With this, EU has clear targets which are broadly divided into 2 timelines. As you rightly said, there are short term targets which are set for achievement by 2030, as well as there are long term targets which are set to achieve by 2050 as an ultimate goals. So when we talk about the short term targets, that are 2030 targets, these are basically interim targets which are aimed at putting the EU on the track for their full decarbonization by 2050 as a long term target. This mainly includes, on the top of all, at least 55% reduction in their greenhouse gas emissions as compared to their 1990s level. This is also one of the binding requirement under their climate law. Under this, there are few more, including 40% share of renewable energy must be achieved in EU's overall energy mix. This is also increased objective, which was earlier set to be 32%. They also set a short-term target of 42.5% energy efficiency improvement as compared to their baseline projections which they had. And this is actually aspirational to 45%, but set to be targeted by 42.5%. They also have planned and, of course, implemented by adding buildings, road transport, and shipping under their EU ETS, which gives an additional reduction on the emissions. They are also planning to phase out internal combustion engines for transportation, including cars and vans, and it is aimed to be having zero emission vehicles by 2035, but they have a milestone of 2030 in the same. So these are few targets that they have set for short-term achievements to achieve the long-term target, which is the ultimate goal of EU, which includes carbon neutrality by 2050. When we say carbon neutrality, their aim is to become net zero GHG emission across entire EU economy. They also want to achieve full decarbonization of power generation industry. Reason being, the power generation or energy industry is the highest emitter across EU, and this will be supported by heavy investment and heavy implementations of renewable projects in wind and solar, with other supported. These are the backbone for their long-term objective. Deep emission cuts in hard-to-abate sectors like steel, chemical, cement, aviation, and use of some technologies like carbon capture and storage, clean hydrogen, agricultural improvements. These are also their long term targets. Circular economy, of course, contributes a lot by means of reduction in resource use, waste reduction, controlling the embedded emission into the products by the design and reuse. They also have various supports to regions to make sure that the long term targets are achieved. So, these are the key targets for short term and long term, which EU has planned for the decarbonization by 2050. Now, you
You
also
know,
mentioned,
I was going to
you
say,
also,
go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
so that's okay. That's okay. So you also talk about priority sectors, right? So to achieve this, of course, they all set priorities based on their information that we have. So EU has prioritized 5 to 6 sectors mainly, which contributes the most in their GHG emissions. And these are very crucial for their carbon neutrality because these are the main sectors where the emissions are coming from. Top of all, it's all always energy or power generation because that's the largest emitter in EU. And hence, the plan is to focus on rapid expansion on the renewable energy, which includes wind, solar, as I mentioned earlier, phasing out the fossil sources like coal, and of course, reducing the consumption of gas. The next sector is transportation sector, which is also one of the fastest growing source of emissions for EU. They have also focused on building because buildings in EU contributes more than 30% of carbon dioxide emission across the EU. So that's next target is building sector as well. Industry, which is mainly hard to abate sectors like cement, steel, chemicals mentioned earlier. They are focused to have carbon capture and storage kind of facilities and technologies to be in place, as well as for industrial purpose as well as transportation sector. They are targeting clean and green hydrogen to be used as a replacement of fossil fuels. Agriculture, because they are source of methane and nitrous oxide emission having huge GWPs or green, the global warming potential, they are also their target sector. Last but not the least, use of land, the land use change as well as forestry is also very crucial for them. Reason being, they are the carbon sinks to absorb the free CO2 from the atmosphere. So when you talk about plants and sectors, these are the things that EU has already in place now.
I had no idea that this was this broad. So, Francesca, you're going to help me unpack this a little bit. How do you see the major challenges for EU's decarbonization?
Yeah, so as Bhavesh mentioned, the EU has made commendable strides, I think, already in the decarbonization process, and they have put in place all these targets. However, the challenges remain. So it's nice to have targets. The other side of the coin is how we actually going to reach those targets. And I think the main sort of risks or challenges today are geopolitical instability. We can't deny that we are in a period whereby there's increased instability, not just thinking about Russia and Ukraine, but now we have the Middle East with Israel, and then also the changes in the US policy. Technological progress is not as fast as we would like it to be, mainly because of cost. So Bhavesh mentioned carbon capture and storage. Yes, it's been around, at least the word, for many years, but it's not widespread, and that's because of complexities, but also cost. Then let's not forget inequalities. So there's a big emphasis on the social impacts that all these changes may have. And we need to ensure that whatever the transition to decarbonization is, it's got to be fair. So take into account the most vulnerable. And then there's also an element of, I think, political credibility. So the EU is now in a place whereby, for instance, it's being bypassed by other regions in terms of clean energy innovation. We've got China. So are we still credible as leaders? And are we still credible in terms of leading this change? So for me, this needs to be taken into account. It's great to have targets. It's great to have legislation in place, but there has to be a system whereby this transition is ensured, made affordable, and it's critical that it happens.
Okay, you know what, David? You're going to help me because I have been caught swimming in a bowl of hydrogen terminology soup. Please help me figure out some translations, or can you help me navigate this?
Sure. Thanks, PJ. I can completely understand that position. Hydrogen terminology can be quite complex, especially with so many overlapping technical, regulatory, and sustainability related terminology or terms. The good news is, once we break it down into some clear categories, it becomes much easier to navigate. And that's really what SGS is helping clients do every day. So I have like a 3-point guide here that I'd like to share with you and our audience to make some sense of hydrogen terminology. So if we start with production methods, or what's known as the colors of hydrogen, this is often really where the confusion can begin. Green hydrogen is produced using or via electrolysis and renewable energy. Blue hydrogen involves fossil fuels, but with carbon capture elements. And then we have gray, turquoise, and pink. These all refer to different production routes and emission profiles. So at SGS, we are helping clients classify and verify these pathways with recognized certification systems. If we talk about carbon intensity and sustainability criteria, increasingly it's not just about how it is made, but how low its emissions really actually are. And that is exactly where frameworks like CertifHy, RSB, ISCC EU come in, and where SGS can provide independent verification to ensure transparency and credibility. Thirdly, regulatory and market alignment. So, as was mentioned earlier in our discussion here, with evolving policies like the EU Renewable Energy Directive, Part 2 and 3, stakeholders need to ensure that their hydrogen meets the required sustainability and traceability criteria. SGS guides clients through these requirements from the documentation phase right through to audit of readiness and beyond. So in short, our job is really to bring clarity to the industry. By using certification as a tool, we help stakeholders speak a common language in the hydrogen value chain, one built on verified data and internationally recognized standards. And that's how we're helping to turn complexity into more confidence.
You will be happy to know that you created a little bit of clarity for PJ as well. So thank you for that. Francesca, I want to know about hydrogen certification. Is it an essential part of developing a global market for hydrogen? And so what is the contribution of the Renewable Energy Directive, or RED, or RED, a new color, in EU's decarbonization?
Yes, so I think that in general, hydrogen certification schemes, no matter if they're European, they're voluntary, private, or state mandated, are great tools to create a global market of hydrogen. And that's because they generate demand and they create consistency, but also compliance to certain regulation. For what concerns Europe, the European Commission, obviously with the RED III directive, has obviously signaled a new phase in terms of requirements of fuels of non-biological origin. Just wanted to open a parenthesis here for everybody to understand that the RED III, like the previous ones as well, is a directive. So it needs to be implemented at member states. And the European Commission is already signaling that this is extremely important because there are a high number of member states that are still to implement the directive. And the EU Commission is ready to take infringement actions against those member states. So this is actually quite serious. And it is super important because it is signaling a new phase in the rollout of hydrogen fuel cell policies as well. Let's not forget what Bhavesh had mentioned already, that the directive requires that 42% of hydrogen use in industry needs to be sourced from renewables by 2030. And this increases the percentage to 60% by 2035. In Europe, obviously, in order to trade with Europe, in order to supply hydrogen to Europe, it needs to be certified in line with the requirements of the RED directive. So it is absolutely a must that certification schemes exist, are developed, and used for whomever wants to trade with Europe or sell into Europe, but also to European hydrogen producers that need to comply with the same requirements. So it's super important.
You know, it's interesting. We're talking about certification, but I'm going to turn the corner and speak to Bhavesh about clean technologies. And if there are any that are focused on the decarbonization goal of the EU, and if we sort of stay like broad strokes, big picture on that. So clean technologies, Bhavesh, take it over.
Yeah, certainly. So, as Francisca rightly said, there are set targets, binding targets to achieve. There are definitely one of the support required from EU is investing in the technologies, and I mean I briefly mentioned in previous part as well. They're focusing the most on the renewable energy technologies, including solar and wind and hydro and bioenergy and other stuffs, including grid modernization as one of the key element, which would be probably a backbone for EU's energy transition. This is followed by clean or green hydrogen, which is a key for industrial as well as transportation sectors decarbonization, because it can heavily replace the blue or gray hydrogen, more precisely gray hydrogen, and have a low carbon or near zero kind of emissions. uh, CCUS, or carbon capture utilization and storage, is next to it, which is very essential for hard to abate sectors like steel, cement, chemicals, where the carbon dioxide is either stored underground or the captured one is, depending on the process, can also be used for industrial process as synthetic fuels. It has also planned for electrification and smart grids, which will emit or replace the use of fossil fuel in heating, and industrial is really critical. Energy efficiency technologies, of course, in line with the one of the short-term objective of improving energy efficiency by 42.5%. They will have cutting-edge energy waste and of course, which is equally important as a clean supply. Circular economy and recycling technologies will also play a crucial role. And of course, there would be certain tools and technologies which would help EU to monitor and measure their track towards decarbonization.
So, David, my next question is for you, and I'm interested in the key certification or compliance challenges hydrogen project developers and OEMs face today when they're moving from pilot to large scale deployment. Are we talking about CertifHy, RSB, and ISCC EU, among others?
Thanks, PJ. I mean, that's a really important question, in my view. To start off, I will explain, hydrogen producers, developers, and OEMs, who they are. So here we're talking really about developers that will are aiming to reach large-scale production of hydrogen. And when we're talking about OEMs, we're talking about original equipment manufacturers, and those are the companies that are imperative to supply the equipment that the producers need to build these large-scale plants. So one of the biggest challenges we see as projects scale from a pilot phase, which is a small-scale production, to commercial deployment, large-scale, is that growing gap between technical ambition and the regulatory reality. At a small scale, there's much more flexibility. But as the developers move towards large-scale operations, they are facing increasingly complex and evolving requirements, particularly, I would say, around greenhouse gas accounting, chain of custody, and compliance with frameworks like the RED II and RED III directives. Another common issue is having that data readiness. So many projects start without robust systems in place to track emissions, feedstock origin, or the actual renewable energy inputs. That significantly can slow down the certification process and creates costly bottlenecks later on in the process. So for O&Ms also, equipment that wasn't necessarily designed with certification requirements in mind, this often needs to be reconfigured, especially when trying to meet certain criteria under the three schemes that we talked about, so CertifHy, RSB, or ISCC. Now, while OEMs aren't directly certified under these schemes, we're talking about the producers, there's still a growing need to ensure that their equipment supports that compliance, especially when it comes to measurement, data integration, and traceability requirements. When they're involved early, they can design systems that help these project developers meet certain certification criteria much more efficiently. And to answer the second part of your question, this is exactly where pre-certification becomes a strategic tool. It gives the project developers a structured way to assess whether their planned setup aligns with sustainability and GHG requirements before any operations begin well in advance. That early insight really helps teams identify gaps, adapt their project design choices, and get the right data systems in place upfront. For the project developers, it acts as a tool to de-risk the project. For OEMs, it clarifies the compliance expectations much early enough to inform technical design. And also for investors and off-takers, it really provides them with confidence that the hydrogen intended to be produced will be certifiable and credible in the market. Now at SGS, we support clients through this pre-certification process, helping them interpret the requirements, prepare the documentation, and establish traceable systems. So the end goal is to make sure that certification isn't a barrier later, but a strategic enabler from the beginning.
Okay, I'm going to go back to our audience for just a second. That was a great answer, David. Thank you. I want to remind everybody about our poll. You can have your say. Put your answer in the chat window below. And the question is, how long does it take to complete a pre-certification process in CertifHy? The answers are A, up to 2 months, B, up to 6 months, or C, more than 6 months? Make sure you put your answer in the chat window below. And I'm now going to turn my attention to Bhavish. And guess what, Bhavish? We're going to talk more about certification. From your standpoint, what does the pre-certification process look like in CertifHy? And is there anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, sure. So as pre-certification is one of the element in a CertifHy scheme requirements, unlike other hydrogen certification schemes like ISCC EU and RSB, which has got other scope of certification as well. So pre-certification is primarily meant for gap assessment, or let's say finding out the shortfalls of economic operators or project developers to see whether their designing or their project is in line with the requirements of certified scheme or RED2, such that once the project is implemented and commercially operated, they actually produce RFNBO compliant hydrogen and its derivatives. So that's where pre-certification come in picture at a nascent stage of project, which is most of the time pre-feed stage or feed stage, where the developers are trying to design up, trying to put up their projects on the board and further going for execution. So this is how pre-certification will help. And when it comes to SGS, we help assess organizations preparedness, organizations compliance to the requirements or level of compliance, and see that whether once they become commercially operational, the product that they will produce would comply or would be able to demonstrate the compliance to RFNBO requirements. So this is where pre-certification comes into picture, helping the clients or organizations to make sure that their aim of producing RFNBO is met. Now, as you said, if I want to add something, I would definitely add something, because pre-certification is just a start to make sure that hydrogen or its derivatives are labeled as RFNBO compliant. So it cannot be labeled at a pre-certification stage, and it has to be done in a next stage of certification process, which is a initial certification, which can only happen once the plant is commercially operated, right? So that actual proof of evidences, actual proofs and evidences, proof of sustainability, documents throughout the chain of custody can be verified and assured that yes, the product is actually RFNBO compliant in line with the scheme requirements and RED requirements. So this is initial certification, which can only happen after the commercial operation starts. Once initial certification is done, the economic operator or the project owner has to undergo recertification every year, considering 12 months validity of the initial certification. And the recertification happens as recurring audit, which has to be completed before the previous certificate gets acquired.
Oh,
So this is a total cycle which becomes a recurring cycle after the first recertification itself, right? And this makes sure throughout the production every year, if a plant or the facility is certified for RFNBO compliance, whatever they will produce will be produced as an RFNBO product. So this is how CertifHy as well as SGS will be contributing to make sure that the world gets RFNBO compliant hydrogen and its derivatives.
amazing answer. Thank you for that. So, Francesca, I'd love it if you could share any technical features of hydrogen schemes like boundaries, production pathways, GHG emissions, chain of custody, etc.
Okay, yeah, thanks, PJ. So if there's a lot of confusion on the colors of hydrogen, there's a lot of confusion on these elements in terms of certification schemes. As I mentioned, there's more than one certification scheme for hydrogen. There's actually quite a bit of fragmentation. We've got the European schemes, but we also have some regional schemes outside of Europe. We also have some domestic schemes. So let's start from the basics. When we looked at technical features of schemes in general related to greenhouse gases, the first thing that comes to mind is system boundaries. And with the hydrogen, the system boundaries are different depending on the schemes. And it really depends on the importance that it's placed on the carbon emissions. So we can have some schemes that look at carbon emissions from well to production gate, This means that what we include there is the input raw materials, including the fuel supply, and then the hydrogen production. We can have the well to consumption gate or the tank, which includes what I've mentioned earlier, plus the transport, the distribution, the storage, and the reconversion. And then we can have the well to wheel, which also includes the use element. So these are variables in the different schemes. Then we have different production pathways. And if David spoke about the colors, here in general, we have wording such as green hydrogen or clean hydrogen or renewable hydrogen. And it really refers to the way it's produced. So you can have electrolysis, renewable electrolysis, but also biogas or biomethane. Schemes like CertifHy, for instance, recognize different pathways depending on the type of compliance that you want to achieve. Some other schemes have, on the other hand, color codes. So they use words such as clean, low carbon, renewables, or other schemes instead have a list of potential attributes that the hydrogen may have. So I understand the confusion that this may actually generate in terms of, producers of hydrogen the moment they have to select the scheme or the standard that they want to comply with. The other element that is also different is the carbon intensity threshold. And this, again, depends on whether we want to qualify it as green, clean, and which are the production pathways. And in general, across all the schemes, it can range from 1 to over 5, and this is expressed in kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilo of hydrogen. And finally, and this is another important element, there's another concept that it's relevant in certain schemes and not so much in others, which is the concept of additionality. And schemes differ on the approach to the issue of additionality. Additionality is the requirement that new electrolysis capacity is supplied by renewable electricity from new and dedicated sources. So in the absence of renewable electricity from new or dedicated sources, the concern is that large-scale ramp-up in the production of hydrogen will divert existing renewable energy from more efficient uses and result in fossil fuel energy use elsewhere in the system. So it's complex, and I do understand the difficulty in selecting the right scheme, and it all boils down to what is the ultimate use of the hydrogen. So who's buying and where is it need to be used for?
There is a lot to cover. We need way more time for all of this, that's for sure. But you know what we're going to do? We're going to take a quick look and see if we got any responses to our poll question, which is how long does it take, up to 2 months, up to 6 months, or more than 6 months to get pre-certification in CertifHy. So we've got a C, which is more than 6 months, and up to 6 months. So that would be a B. And Bhavish, I've got a question for you, but just before that, can you respond to those answers? I mean, what do they indicate to you?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So in terms of pre-certification, especially with respect to CertifHy, because that's the scheme which provides pre-certification step, it's more of an preparatory assessment. Like the developers are preparing for the project, and we assess what they have as a at the designing stage, which doesn't lead with a lot of verification activities against the set requirements of the scheme. So by and large, given that the documents are available with them, the design basis, the related calculations and stuff, it generally takes around 2 months to complete a pre-verification process. Okay.
Wow.
So that's really fast, because it doesn't go into detailed verification of proof of sustainability and entire custody or chain of custody. So it is little faster than the certification. But yeah, this is given that they have all the documents ready, available for assessment, and reviews are performed according to the viability.
That's
But
great. Oops, sorry. I was just going to ask you my next question because I'm watching the clock and I know we're getting very short
yeah,
on time.
sure.
So what are the leading H2 certification schemes supporting EU's decarbonization, specifically CertifHy, RSB, and ISCC EU? Can you give me just a couple of points about each of them?
Sure. So as you mentioned rightly, there are three schemes, or which we talk about in SGS, which are compliant to uh, EU's requirement, CertifHy, RSB, and ISCCU. So the basic difference between these schemes is CertifHy focuses mainly on hydrogen certification. It doesn't have any other, renewable component or biofuels or e-fuels and those stuffs, unlike RSB and ISCC. That's the main difference which comes in. To mention that all these three schemes are based on RED compliance requirements. So all the three schemes have their own scheme documents, which are ultimately referring to RED requirements, and they are having hydrogen specific stuff also. RSB, ISCC being more broader in terms of scopes, including biofuels and other e-fuels as well, including RCF. And of course, there are sustainability focus everywhere. So CertifHy being only hydrogen, it's GHG and sustainability, whereas RSB has got additional element of social as well as environmental concerns as well, and same is a moderate level for ISCC EU.
Oh,
And just a one line to mention is CertifHy is applicable to all those hydrogen producers and suppliers where hydrogen is being consumed within EU state, whereas the RSB and ISCC are global. That's briefly a difference between these schemes.
that's
SGS is out there.
I love the fact that you were able to sort of break that down, in very simple points. So before we continue, though, I want to have a quick look at who's in our audience. We have the best global audiences, and I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We're going to see, Angola, Texas. Wow. Lots of great people in our audience, and we want to thank you for joining us today for this amazing discussion about building trust and transparency in the hydrogen sector with my guests, Francesca Cerchia, Bhavesh Prajapati, and David Kanasari. Now, I want to remind everybody that we do have a Q&A coming up at the end of this interview segment. If you are interested to put a comment or a question in the chat window below, we'd love to hear from you. Okay, there are only a couple more questions before our Q&A. And David, with your experience and with keeping the operators in mind, how critical is certification in securing off-take agreements or accessing regulated hydrogen markets, especially within the EU? What are the main aspects that companies should take into account in this area?
Yeah, another great question. I mean, certification is absolutely critical here. We've talked a lot about the EU directives, RED 2 and RED 3, especially there. And I think, if your hydrogen isn't certified, you simply can't access regulated markets, claim incentives, or count toward renewable energy targets. So really, from a market entry standpoint, certification is foundational. It's also a key factor in securing offtake agreements. I mean, buyers in sectors like steel, aviation, chemicals, they are looking to decarbonize and searching for hydrogen that's not only low carbon, but verifiably so. And that certification element gives them the confidence that they need. And increasingly, we're seeing those requirements written directly into long-term contracts. This is really why early engagement is so important. By considering certification requirements from the beginning, not really as an afterthought, developers can design projects that are aligned with market and regulatory expectations. And that in turn means that there are fewer redesigns, much smoother compliance, and a faster path to market. At SGS, we work quite a lot with operators early in that development process to map out certification pathways, align with schemes like CertifHy, ISCC, or RSB, and set up the emissions accounting and verification frameworks that they're going to need. So this proactive approach helps to ensure projects aren't just technically viable, but commercially and legally ready to move forward. So in short, I would say certification isn't just a regulatory hurdle, it's a strategic enabler, and early engagement is what turns it into a competitive advantage.
So I have a final question for you, David, before our Q&A. And I want to know from your perspective, how are OEMs and operators preparing for the shift towards verified green hydrogen supply chains? And what role can independent assurance play in de-risking those efforts?
Yeah, I mean, it really touches on some of the points we mentioned about OEMs and operators before, but enhancing on that, we are seeing a real shift in the mindset between OEMs and operators that are now, proactively building sustainability into project design and the supply chain, rather than trying to retrofit compliance later, which is obviously costly and timely. This includes designing equipment and systems that can accurately measure emissions and energy use, report this data clearly, and have it independently verified. This is a process often called measurement reporting and verification, or MRV for short. So this approach really helps to ensure that hydrogen's environmental impact is transparent and trustworthy, and that's exactly what buyers and regulators are demanding. There's also a growing emphasis on traceability. Regulators and off-takers want to know exactly where the hydrogen came from and how it was produced. So again, we're talking about the origin and the production method. Operators are also responding by adopting chain of custody models and also engaging with certification schemes right from the start. Another point here is independent assurance plays a critical role in that shift. It really provides objective validation that builds trust with investors, buyers, and the regulators. More importantly, it helps to identify gaps early, and whether that's in emissions calculations or claim about renewable energy inputs. So these issues can be addressed before they become costly roadblocks. And at SGS, we really see ourselves not just as auditors, but as partners in enabling credible, low carbon hydrogen markets. Our role is to help the key stakeholders reduce risk and accelerate their path to verified, investable hydrogen supply chains.
You know what? I can't believe how quickly our time has gone, and we're going to go into our Q&A, and I want to make sure to thank everybody for joining us today for this session about building trust and transparency in the hydrogen sector with my SGS expert guests, Francesca Cerchia, Bhavesh Prajapati, and David Kenarsari. So let's go with my first question, which is for you, Francesca. I think as an industrial systems engineer and PMP certified QHSE specialist with 9+ years in quality and environmental management, I'm keen to know how can RED III certification frameworks help both EU and global hydrogen producers, especially SMEs, build a trusted and scalable market. This may not be for you, Francesca. I'm not sure, but I just you were my first thought. But perhaps it's David or Bhavesh. Can either one of you answer? I want to just remind our audience that if you have a question or a comment, you can also just leave it in the chat window below, and somebody will get back to you even after the recording is finished.
Who wants to take this, guys? Yeah. I mean, I can take it. I'm not quite sure, and I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure I understand what the question is, but I'll try and answer to the best of my knowledge, or from whatever I understand. So I think we've touched on this more than once throughout the session. So the certification framework that comes from the RED II and then 3 directive, whenever that will be fully implemented, are certification frameworks that are needed at European level to build a hydrogen market that complies with the requirements of the and all those thresholds in the hydrogen space. Now, how can that help small and medium enterprise I don't really know what a small and medium enterprise is doing in the global hydrogen producer space, unless they are designing hydrogen producing facilities. And the only thing that I can recommend is that depending on where the small and medium enterprise is located and where they wish to trade with, so what is the end market of the hydrogen, either aligns with one of the European frameworks or a local one if that exists in that specific country.
Francesca, you're going to stay on the hot seat for just a moment. Can you give me some final thoughts about Impact Now?
Yes, absolutely. So fundamentally, all I can say is act now. SGS is the greatest partner you may wish to have on your path to sustainability, or let's call it journey to sustainability. I think that's even more appropriate. We have more than 30 years of leadership in sustainability, but also scientific excellence. And we're always at the forefront of best practice and international standards development. So we are your partner also in terms of selecting what is most appropriate for you, for your type of operations, and for your industry. On top of that, we have experts that span across all industries, and we have a global presence. We are present in more than 140 countries, and we really are boots on the ground.
There is a lot going on, and it's amazing to see SGS at the forefront. So I've got really a final question, and it's going to be for Bhavesh and for David. And I'd like to know if you can tell me a little bit about the progress that you're seeing in each of your areas. David, how about you start, and then Bhavesh?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, from my work with developers and operators, what stands out for me is how certification is becoming a cornerstone of their project development strategies, and very much early on. There's clear momentum around using the CertifHy framework early on to validate the sustainability and greenhouse gas performance of their hydrogen project. Developers are also realizing that integrating certification requirements from the outset, especially around emissions accounting and renewable energy sourcing, helps reduce those risks to avoid the costly rework later in the process. So I think operators are also investing in data management and monitoring systems needed to meet that robust criteria from CertifHy for traceability and transparency. So as these projects scale, CertifHy really provides a trusted EU-backed standard that buyers and regulators do recognize, are starting to recognize even more so now. And it's making it easier for operators to secure offtake agreements and access regulated markets. And our goal at SGS is really, we support these clients by guiding them through the pre-certification and certification pathway early, helping to translate those complex requirements into practical steps that keep projects on track and market ready. And it's very much it's exciting to see CertifHy playing that key role in driving the hydrogen economy forward with that integrity and transparency. And then just to come back to, I think, a question that you launched before, PJ, if we can get those exact requirements from the SME, it will help us to understand what is their actual goal in their project in terms of producing, whether it's exporting or importing or consuming green hydrogen, for example, within the EU market. And I think we could take that example and have a discussion offline with the person who asked the question.
Amazing. And actually, people who ask the questions and leave the comments, we will be getting back to you even at the end of after the end of this session. Bhavesh, you get the last word, and I bet you it's about technology and technical things.
Yeah, thanks, PJ. So yeah, talking about the progress over and above what David already said, hydrogen certification really plays a pivotal role in ensuring that there is a real achievement of the net zero emissions across EU, not only EU, I would say worldwide, right? And existence of such schemes, be it certified as a global scheme or, as Francisca mentioned, there are national schemes as well in many countries. They all are progressing, gradually. I mean, they're getting matured. They are now, being launched one by one in country. For example, India recently launched Green Hydrogen Mission India, which is a scheme to make sure that there's a low carbon hydrogen. Likewise, Korea, Japan, everyone has their own national schemes being developed and coming into the market to ensure that they have these things achieved. Similarly, there are key elements which are also aligned to each other, whether it is a national scheme or CertifHy. So that's also something which is progressing. Schemes are getting matured, coming in force. People are implementing them and taking benefit of them. CertifHy will, being a global scheme, will definitely ensure that there is a cross-border hydrogen trade and there is a global credibility across the trade. So I think it's nicely progressing. I mean, just to give an indication, there are a lot of revisions by now in scheme requirements in various, GHG emission saving as well as sustainability requirements, and it's being robust, by the time passes. So that's the progress we have seen. Now, with this kind of maturity in the market by now already, I see a lot of progress coming up further, and with a lot of projects, hundreds of projects in the world, maybe more than 800 projects as of now at a different stages of project, of course. They will all be having benefit of these schemes in coming future, to ensure that there is always an element of trust and transparency in the products they are supplying in terms of hydrogen and its derivative as an RFNBO compliant product. So I mean, it's going to be a great progress in the hydrogen certification process by various schemes, including CertifHy and national schemes.
Lots to talk about, lots to be optimistic about, but I'm going to have to stop things there. I want to thank my SGS experts, Francesca Cerchia, Bhavish Prajapati, and David Kenarsari, for speaking with us today about building trust and transparency in the hydrogen sector and what companies should know and do. We're so glad that you were here to be part of this interesting and informative session. And if you want more information, either leave a comment or a question in the chat window below and someone will get back to you, or you can also visit the link on your screen. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching. I'm PJ Kwong. Bye for now.